Today we're going to spend a little bit of time to look at the forward motion, the evolutionary journey that looks at change. Where are we going in relation to the involution and evolution that takes place as we experience so much of what is being released, but also so much of the creativity of the world. There's a great observation happening right now as ascent and descent takes place. So we've been looking quite a lot at the dream state and what it might mean to exist in the world as the wakeful dream. We've been positing the fourth state of consciousness that looks at living awake, but in a way that is open, that we have been seeing as the dream state, the psychedelic awareness, the spiritual awakening, the Kundalini rising. So this, in many ways, ushers us into the sociogenesis elements of this work. We've been looking quite a bit at the psychogenesis, or what happens internally, especially in relation to the whole brain model that looks at certain shifts that are taking place in the central nervous system that helps us to understand not just innerdance, but how we might support the voluntary and involuntary work that very much characterizes what it's like to live in the world today, especially in the way the eye and the ear now conjoins together in secondary orality, that which modern technology, modern media harbors for us, So we look then at what it's like to be in a world of the dream, the dream state, characterized by the ascent and descent qualities, descriptive or referential to what it means to live. When we talk about the sociogenesis aspects of this work, we would look at the historical frames, the basis upon which the unfoldment of consciousness through synchronic space and diachronic time, that inner dance is in fact a mirroring of what is already taking place, no matter where you look. It doesn't matter if you're in Africa, in the Philippines, in America, or China. There is a great amount of experimentation and journeying of the who am I across the different regions of the energy field we might perceive as the matrix of reality. So we today build a new grid that looks at different points in our history, of our evolution, where ascent might be seen as the creative parts, the creative aspects. And this isn't really linear in any sense. Maybe since the inception of human societies, of social dimensions as we know it, there is an ascent and there is a descent taking place. And how we might see where we are right now is there is a conjoining of both the ascent and descent. And even framing that so far, especially in the last video where we looked at the work of both structuralism and deconstruction, we talked about the thoughts and processes of both Ferdinand de Saussure and Jacques Derrida. I'm very excited to come to this place, primarily because in observation of people who are just feeling so much in a time of shifts. It's only a matter of time before we look at the existing worldviews, like where are we now in regards to how the collective might understand the philosophical, the sociological, the political underpinnings of what takes place around the planet. What are the frames that best holds how we place ourselves in the map, you know? So modernism as a worldview might help us to more or less encapsulate or contain so much of the work that has taken place that looks at the upward motion of life as we have come to know it, especially ushered by the age of the Enlightenment, structuralism, as we just talked about, the industrialization of the world, or what you might see taking place through globalism. And so we've been looking at the contradictory or the even complementary encapsulation. What is the thing? What is the worldview? What is the moment that helps to hold the deconstructive, the descending motion that is almost a direct reaction to what modernism brings to us? And this is basically the conversation that postmodernism more or less brings to bear. So we're going to be looking at the forward motion into future time. So you may have or you may have not heard the term that I'm about to bring up that hosts many of the conversations around innerdance. Like when we go into this expanded state, this wakeful dream, what worldview does that map us onto? So that were we to look at the inquiries, who am I, how are you now? What this frames for us is where are we in terms of the cartographic, what ascent and descent poses or postures for us. So post-postmodernism, which we can see either as an inquiry, or here we look at the simultaneity of both ascent and descent as coming into deep reflection, a kind of feedback that we get from the inner dance process. We've been looking at everything from the psychedelic phenomena, the hallucinogenic quality that marries both the stimulant and the depressant effects, depending on what we hear, what we ingest, what we look at, that either awakens us or puts us to sleep, that either brings about an experience of birth or an experience of death. We also have been looking at the life review, the near-death experience that is an analogy to the REM state. That comes about when ascent and descent both are held in what we sense in this circadian rhythm model that we've been looking at, that helps us to understand the rising and the falling of the music that brings about these healings, these transformations, and these expanded states of perception that normally takes place in an inner dance process. In the same breath, we've also been looking at the work of Jacques Lacan in regards to what is it like to be in this realm of the symbolic, to experience, to perceive from, to create from, which is also to deconstruct from the halfway house that is in between the realm of the real and the realm of the imaginary. Going back to the egocentric speech that was unraveled to us by the work of Lev Vygotsky, that is almost a kind of return to the age of primary orality, whereby we were sensing the world through the confines and the senses of the ear. When we listened and we vibrated so much more than we were literalizing the world through the confines of the sense of the eye, which looked at the world in a more literate fashion. So understanding the ascent of consciousness then in regards to synchronic history, modernism is characterized by creative elements of life. Were we to look at developmental models, not just in the way that cognition evolves and develops, but also in the way that human beings exist in the world in developmental frames. When you look at the way cities, skyscrapers, going to the moon, there is a sense of evolution, entropic as it may be. So postmodernism then becomes a kind of antithesis or a direct reaction towards modernism. This is characterized more as a reactive stance, as characterized by how the world of art, cinema, theater, societal expressions show to us a kind of rejection of past narratives, past blanket ideologies that sought to maybe even manipulate or that sought to influence many of the activities, many of the ways upon which we manage the world, the way we govern life, the way we constructed and here more or less like deconstructed the world. So were we to go back to the 1960s, for example, at a time when people began to reject the Western hegemonic influences that pretty much revolved around developmental industrialist ideas that were quite patriarchal in nature, we have entered the world of post, a sort of deconstructive remapping that ushers into us the critical outlook, the criticism of what structuralist, capitalist, Marxist, empiricist, modernist, industrialist, and rationalist mindsets that brought with it the experiences of poverty, of war, the effects of climate change, of depression, of suicide rates. Many of us seek to heal so that when we do this work in healing and transformation process, there is a sense of release or purgation that is very much reminiscent of what postmodernism characterizes in many ways. So postmodernism then is definitely a more reactive rather than creative stance upon which we are now moving away from these dualistic ascent and descent ways of being in the world. We now are being ushered into a post-postmodernist approach to being here, that which you might see as something co-creative and co-reactive. Sorry. This is an old slide that I just brought up. So co-creative and co-reactive might be what post-postmodernism brings to us, especially as we get a sense of that in the videos that we've been going over, that more or less paints the way we might view the world as you move through synchronic space and diachronic time. So interestingly enough, one of the more observable tenets of postmodernism is a romantic return to the past. There's a kind of inversion in history that seems to help us to life review the infinite amounts of information that has been stored or recorded over history, but in many ways is actually more of a life review into synchronic space that helps us to see what has been stored in the language centers of the collective that place holds the complexity that arose in modernistic times. which we now are very much in reaction to, that we're reacting towards. So post-postmodernism questions what would it be like to enter into a post-structuralist, post-capitalist, post-Marxist, post-empiricist, modernist, industrialist, and rationalist world. Were we to cease from purely reacting from a point in time in the world's history to find a more healthy way of co-creating and to marry a structuralist and deconstructive stance that allows us to live in a world that has contradictions built into existing and new emergent ideologies that we've been mapping out in different ways in the journey of life as we know it. So one of the more important tenets that we have to bring up that looks at the ascent-descent movements upon which the world flows forward in its progressive evolution might look basically at how we process, how we hold information, or how we might relate to truth, or how we might relate to meaning in regards to mind. Like, how do we access information in either ascent or descent modes? So in the moment called modernism, we saw just how dependent we became on the world of science, the world of rationality. Upon the invention or innovation of the scientific method, we processed information empirically, which was very much proof-based, which meant that we used the senses, especially by way of the signification of the human eye, a very useful tool that allowed us to literalize rational, logical, or hierarchical times that modernized the archaic, magical, and mythical world that primary orality held at bay for us. Postmodernism, on the other hand, was more discursive by nature. Dialogue or conversation, especially as we develop the lower right C quadrant mode of thinking that is more conversational or more of the communicator role, where a lot of the emotional processing is happening, that more or less seeks to balance out so much of the complexities and the stored information that is being held in upper left A quadrant and is organized in lower left B quadrant, that now seeks for a kind of integral or holistic approach that helps to balance out or to harmonize so much of the conflicts that we see arising from living in the world from purely logical, rational, or quantitative left brain ways of being in the world. We've been making quite a big point of this, that the point of descent that postmodernism ushers for us is allowing us to go back into secondary orality that allows us to listen to the great amounts of information that we have stored already in the world as complexity, but which hasn't really found the time and space to go into ontological questioning, like what does it mean, who am I, what are we doing here? We now then seek to understand what it might be like to live in a world that is just holding so much, but is also in a process of integral transformation. So slowly we make our way to the seminal work of two postmodernist philosophers named Deleuze and Guattari, who created a model of thought. This is going to be quite useful for innerdance facilitators who are witnessing people going into expanded states and are beginning to experience the post-postmodernist structure, which is more of a deconstruction often rather than a kind of structure, really. We kind of need a new way of mapping out the very way in which we map out. So we're going to be looking at the idea of the rhizome or the rhizomatic. So according to Deleuze, the rhizome is an image of thought based on the botanical rhizome, something that signifies or apprehends multiplicities or contextualities. So the rhizome is a plant. In Maya, one of the rhizomes that we have is the devil's weed. The turmeric is a kind of rhizome that we normally plant. And it's a sort of plant that deconstructs the idea of the beginning and the end. Turmeric, for example, is a kind of plant that is simultaneously like a root, a branch, a stem, a trunk, a fruit. Simultaneously, it spreads across space that destroys the notions of organizational structures. It connotes a root tree system which destroys the idea of causality along chronological and sequential lines, and were you to look for the origins or the source of the evolution of the plant, it is in many ways difficult because there is no sense of center or pinnacle that concludes things. So Deleuze felt that this is a very good analogy for how thought process apprehends multiplicities in the post-modernist age. Very resonant with how innerdance awareness spreads activation. We've been looking at the shifting of neurotransmitters, the rerouting of dopamine coming from the VDA that when we send it to the spontaneity activating part of the central nervous system called the striatum, where we begin to experience awareness as a decentralization of the sense of center. It's more of an omnicentric view of the world, whereas any single point upon which we focus attention on, there is a simultaneity, a lack of hierarchy or organizational structure that gives us a sense of start and a sense of conclusion. So usefully, Deleuze more or less uses the rhizome as a useful, productive analogy of how thought systems have this way of breaking patterns, where even as we break old lines, there is a possibility of restarting continuously. It looks at the mind more as a kind of mapping, as opposed to what he calls a tracing, a sequential tracing, which then frames the old ways of thinking as more arboresque or arboreal, kind of tree-like structure where there's a clear sense of center, still point upon which the branching out and the rooting is held together by what we might call an ideology. In post-modernist thought, what we might call the meta-narrative in the past as what Christianity, for example, or capitalistic thought or Marxist belief structures sought to posture a blanket term or an umbrella idea that lords over all the many different particles or parts that stem from a main or basic idea that takes a kind of leadership or systemic governance that leads the way or gives guidance for all the different parts to follow a sense of whole. The rhizomatic brings about a more symmetrical view that all parts are holons or holographic. They co-organize, that they co-create as well as co-react to the field, a kind of concept that describes theory and research that allows for multiplicities or non-hierarchical entry and exit points in the way we represent and interpret the vast amounts of information that we are storing and holding in the world today. Also, a way of representing nomadic growth, the way rhizomes are propagated. There's no individuation of one plant from the other. It just spreads across horizontally rather than vertically. What the rhizome then really breaks apart is the narrativization of the world. That when we understand history and culture as you know it, it's more of a map that we lose the way we normally sense the past, and we see it more as how we understand language to be an unfoldment over the y-axis or space, as opposed to the way we speak in the way that we use speech that is more diachronic, that is more sequential. We start to sense reality more as a coexistent thing that holds the nested layers of meaning at any given moment, at any point in time, synchronically, which we describe as how spiritual people, autistic, intuitive awareness brings to us that is almost unavoidable in a world of posts, whereby as we journey into secondary reality in this dreamlike ascent-descent post-post-modernist reality, there is an emergence of awareness, the kind of which we are not exactly used to, but because it is in many ways inevitable, what truly arises seems to be the signifieds, the concept, the deep structure that is being held by all of these sound images, these many signifiers that have become quite literal, that have become quite real, which is really more of imaginary aspects of the world that holds the sense of wholeness, the true origins, the true essential layers, that is the true genesis that has no beginning, that has no end, that is always in the middle or in between things, interbeing or intermezzo. It was the scientist David Bohm who helped to unravel the science of quantum physics, whose work in not just science but also philosophy and spirituality brought to us these two important terms. So the implicit order is the deep underlying structure, the ground from which reality emerges. And this might be more denoted or connoted by the ear, as opposed to the explicit eye. The explicit is the surface phenomena, the literal phenomena, the mere approximations of the sensible parts of the world that is being held by the holistic, deep structure that has no limits. The signifieds that underlay the signifiers that we experience as the name, the many different details that egoic, subjective, or what David Bohm calls the unfolded order that is held by the unfolded order that holds reality at bay. This work around implicit and explicit order is a very good conversation to hold that helps us to look at the concept of memory, which is going to come up time and time and again when we facilitate innerdance. The question being, what does it mean to remember? What does it mean to go back into synchronic space and diachronic time in ways that looks at the many different parts that we are placeholding through language, through the iconic, semantic, and echoic network that is sort of like an internet of things, the internet of the world that structures and also deconstructs the world as we experience it every day that we are here. Okay, so as a way of ending this video, I'm going to share one of the older videos that I was able to document in the early days of innerdance. This one being something that speaks about the deep surface structure that words point back to, that allows for the chain of signification that we call reality, that allows us to be here within space and time, but in many ways we are also experiencing something that is outside space and outside time. That this might be the very point of the work that we do now, that we are learning to be outside of space and outside of time as we live inside the space-time continuum we call the human existence. So thank you for your energy and space and time today as we shift into more and more different modes of becoming aware of the many changes that are taking place within the human being as we journey through this mysterious phenomenon called the innerdance process. Thank you.
But all of a sudden I felt the tightness here again, and I used my hand to press here. It's like pressing a button. So I was so excited because every time when I press, there's a color come out. So every time I press, I see green, I see violet, I see red. So I press and press and press. And after a while, I was thinking, what's wrong with this? And yeah. So I try again and I open. So I got very excited. So, and I open again and I don't see myself anymore. I only see color. And when I look, I disappear. But it's so excited. So now I know where to press the button.
This was probably the most quiet that I've seen my body to be. But at the same time, this is the most energy I've ever felt. And I ask who I am and what I am. The answer that was given to me was everything and everyone. My world is what I created to be. So with that comes great responsibility. Infuse all the joy and love that I could possibly offer. That comes from seeing that we are all one. There's nothing to fear. So that's what I saw.
It was the first time I've actually been able to grasp what it means to be in the womb of the earth. If we are able to be in the womb of the earth, that's where the universe is, and that's where we are all one. And in that place is where all of these magical things happen. The energy that came out of that moment was so huge, and there was so much vibration. There was just so much bliss in this room, and it was so beautiful. Thank you.
There was the universe and the galaxy, and the planets were lined up, and the lion was bouncing on all the different planets. And then an energy ball came out, and it was playing basketball as it was jumping on the planets. And all of a sudden I sat up, and every chime of it felt like snowflakes on my face. And then the lion woke up, and it was just the mane and the fur. And we were dancing like ego didn't exist. Not that we got rid of ego, that it was never even born. And so I was feeling vibrations and feeling the hair. I realized that's sort of where I am right now.
Build your foundation from the feet up, from the ground from which you stand. the earth where the grass grows, and shoot the light from your fingertips. I saw the Garden of Eden. The journey is long, the journey is painful. I have blanketed you with white feathers to comfort you. Love, surrender to it. Merge into one. Unconditional love, non-expectation, non-attachment, non-judgment, pure bliss. Now there's work to be done. It's time in a land where no time exists. Work in harmony as one heart beating to the rhythm of the universe, like the pulsing within your own body.
Before, when I'd facilitate, I would feel them energetically and it would come, but this time I actually saw the colors, which is pretty interesting and exciting. And I also became aware of understanding of the concept of contraction and awakening. Now understanding what that is was some kind, it's a great comfort, because when that's happening, I also know something's awakening. So I'm giving something up to let something arise. Just surrender to that. And then towards the end, it still came back to the sun. It's still, the sun was just like beaming so powerfully. But beyond the sun was the rest of the universe. And that was that. Like, this is who I am, this is who I was, and this is who I will always be.
I came out in the sky, in the starlit sky. I was able to press all the stars, and they were bursting into these energy bombs, explosions. I saw myself again carrying people, humans that turn into light. The essence of this journey for me was letting go of doubts that I've been having. There are no doubts. It's all what I see, what I visualize, what I create.
I ask myself, God, give me an answer. Who am I? I'm water. So spontaneous, the movement that I have. Just flow with the energy of the universe and offer no resistance. Just go where the energy takes you. There was this pulling in my hand, like I was reaching out. I was pulled up with both hands. I was ready to fly with my wings. I was flying, and then after a while I pressed my hand on my heart, and from there I felt everything. The universe is manifesting in you. You're a universe in yourself, and the universe is in you, like you're a reflection of the universe.
It started off as an energy conversation, starting from the root upwards, and then the dance would manifest in different ways. And it was beautiful. There was this openness. It was flow. There's a big difference between the yellow. The orange is very suggestive. The yellow is very strong, and the movements become they're militaristic. Whereas the green is this complete swirl and flow. The energy is so alive. So it's like the choice is immediately presented. In that conversation, then all this sadness came up, fear of change, but it was beautiful because I felt something. So like, let me feel something. Oh, okay. Oh dear. You get what you asked for.
A very ancient energy flows to me. The moment it flows my palm, the moment I put my palms on the forehead. And the energy tells me to share with self and share with a few people in the room. And each one I did, they just flew off. At the end, my body was integrating with this new energy. And at the end, I lay on the mat and heal myself. Someone served me. It's not someone, but 4 pairs of hands served me. It was a great experience of moving, integrating a very deep, stuck block energy that slowly comes out. Yeah. I'm my energy bubble. I went through a cycle of disintegrating and integrating and disappearing to time and space. I lost a lot of memories.
When holding space now, I feel the more I empty myself, the more open I can allow my heart to be, to allow the flow, love to flow through. It's like even without touching the other person, energetically it opens up, and whatever thoughts that I send, healing thoughts, I can see the energy moving and shifting and transforming almost immediately. It's simple, it really is just healing through love, sending love.
I felt I was rewarded with a million lights, and I saw turquoise, brilliant, brilliant turquoise. With my hands, if I moved them 1 inch in, it would transform to a different color. If I moved it further in, it became yellow and orange. Then all the way in, it became indigo. So I was playing with that for a while. I'm finding more and more with innerdance, yoga, and my journey, that switching from one to the other is nothing.
Rebirthing and coming out and seeing the world after destruction. The destruction that had happened and the people that were left over from the destruction, and the deep pain and the deep sadness that they were feeling. And I started crying and just like saying, like, help me, I need help. I can't do this by myself. And then just at that moment, someone came over, one of the assistants, and put their hands on my heart. And it was like this color, red, orange, went immediately to green, and I just felt like I was supported. And I was thinking, like, no, I'm not doing this work by myself. There's a room full of people that are here doing this work together. And then it was just like this feeling of an intense joy. And there was this flicker of fear, and I thought, this is the fear that's going to come. This is just a teeny tiny little taste, and you have to be still, you have to be grounded, you have to be centered. And there was just like this like rock solidness that came over. Just the end of it was super blissful and super pleasant, and yeah.
When I came back to myself, it was like another moment of reunion with myself again, and more tears kept coming out, and then the tears were intermixed with laughing, and I could not even like I didn't even know whether or not I was laughing or crying. It was so just intertwined together. I just knew that something was cracking open and something was releasing, and it was like simultaneously painful and joyful, painful and joyful, painful and joyful, and I'm still in that space right now.
I saw a lot of spiraling greens, and it wouldn't stop, and I was just playing with it. I was sort of journeying with a lot of green light and purple in space. And obviously the purple is about vision, is really how to stimulate and create the vision of the heart as we journey on our paths.
Just 2 months ago, if somebody said, "Who are you? What do you do?" I would respond, "I'm an art teacher and I teach at blah 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 blah." And then coming here on the plane, you've got to fill out those little white forms, right? And there's a space for what you do, occupation. Well, I've quit my job. So then I put teacher. And as I wrote it, I thought, what the fuck do you teach? And then now I know through this dance, I know that I will teach by how I live, by how I choose to live, and the knowledge that what I vibrate can be is huge.